War everywhere. Except this place. No war here at Fort Snelling in the Twin Cities, in Minnesota. This was the video I intended to make. I'd pop into Fort Snelling on my way to Texas from St. Paul, Minnesota, have a look around, check out some architecture, talk about some history, you know, make a YouTube video. And we can still have that video. I can tell you about how it was originally Fort St. Anthony, completed in 1825, and was renamed in honor of Colonel Josiah Snelling, who supervised its construction. I can tell you that although Fort Snelling never saw any action, it was garrisoned or occupied by troops during the Civil War and the Spanish-American War. That in 1917, it saw 2,500 soldiers graduate from officer training during World War I. That during World War II, 300,000 men and women shipped out from Fort Snelling, and 6,000 World War II soldiers studied Japanese there at the language school. I can show you all the cool buildings like the magazine and the cannons it would have armed, the tower and its aerial view of the fort complex, the commissary and the goods one might have bought in days gone by, the hospital and all the reasons you would never want to be there. I hope that's not like a intravenous syringe, is it?
No, there are two ways I can put medicine in your body.
Gotcha. And the one-room schoolhouse. Humble living quarters. The different shops, like the leather shop, and the carpentry shop, the blacksmith shop, and whatever this terrifying, gaping maw of menacing darkness is. But there is one aspect and one tale about this historic fort that I wasn't expecting to learn. It's an important tale about American history, and I'm glad that I get to share it with you, because it's one of those stories that is being sadly phased out of the current education system here in America. And it starts here. All right, the coast is clear of children. Here we go. Oh, very nice.
Isn't that a nice effect? You don't expect that the ceilings are going to be so tall when you walk through that front door. So it kind of gives you the impression that the house is smaller until you walk inside.
Mm-hmm. It's like a TARDIS.
Yeah. The paint colors were determined by finding original paint downstairs, and they actually kept a section of that where they did some of that archaeological work.
Mm-hmm.
It's Georgian in style. It has some curious Flemish details, two gables on the end, and then kind of a Flemish-shaped gable above the door. Snelling certainly had input into its design. He was stationed as part of the New York militia in upstate New York, so he would have been familiar with these two architectural styles.
Okay.
And we do like to mention, actually we're sad to mention, that even though slavery was against the law here, there were enslaved servants working in this house.
I did see that Dred Scott was an enslaved person here.
Yep, and Harriet may have worked here, quiet please, Harriet may have worked here on occasion, as maybe being rented out for her services.
Okay.
That's Dred's wife, Harriet.
Okay.
And that's why the fort was built here, because they wanted to be able to monitor boat traffic coming out of either.
Now, if you look at the plates, it's the names of the enslaved people. slavery was illegal here, but the only people who couldn't enforce it were the police and, well, the army, who were the police, and who's going to check the army? Nobody. So, there you go. Dred and Harriet Scott were enslaved by the post-surgeon Dr. Emerson, whose chambers we saw in the hospital earlier, and they are believed to have worked and slept in this kitchen. They were married soon after meeting by Harriet's former enslaver, Lawrence Taliaferro.
Hey,
Greetings.
how you doing?
I'm well, and yourself?
I'm okay. I'm not as hot as yesterday, but
Well,
better. Where are you coming from today?
I am up here from Houston, Texas, so I know all about the heat.
You're used to the heat.
I don't know if you ever really get used to it, but
Yeah. Well, welcome to the Dred and Harriet Scott space. You familiar with the story?
yes, I am.
Okay.
But for the viewers at home, if you want to retell it,
Sure. So who's going to see this?
whoever watches my YouTube channel.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you. So my name's Jim, and you have different people who interpret this space. Mm-hmm. So depending on who's in here, you get different stories or different versions of it. So this is a chronological history here, and it's interesting and it's good. One of the admissions that I like to make right off is, in a previous life, long ago in a galaxy far, far away, I read this case in law school.
Okay.
I don't remember a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the holding, because you had to know the holding for the test, right? The holding was that, by the U.S. Supreme Court, was that black Americans, the federal government was not bound to respect the rights of any black Americans. They weren't citizens. None of them, free or enslaved, were citizens. They were never meant to be citizens. Mm-hmm. Oh, and the other holding was that the Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional because the federal government can't regulate slavery in the territories, and it can't regulate property. Mm-hmm. Now, that's kind of the dry part of it. So when I got in here, it's like, so how do you make this a little more real to people, right? And it isn't until you dig into the people themselves that it starts to grip you a little bit. So what happens is Harriet and Dred meet here. She's brought by the Indian agent, Lawrence Tolliver. He comes with the surgeon, John Emerson. He's 15 years older. I'd like to think they married for love. Probably not. There are practical reasons for slaves to get married. You know, it's safer. You get to pool their resources. And whether they were in love or not, I imagine that they would have probably kept their heads down the remainder of their lives and not get their heads shot off because they were slaves. They had no rights. They had no leverage. And the only reason that they decided to go forward with their case is because they had kids. Now, this makes sense to me, Lizzie and Eliza, because so people will say, oh, Jim, you were in education. You must love kids. Like, nah, actually, I hate kids. No, I'm just kidding. I had kids. And so one of the things that would cause you to maybe take this chance and take this risk is because you want your kids to be free. So let me take a little bit of legerdemain with the story and the timeline. But just imagine it's 1839, 1840. It's cold. It's January. Dred and Harriet are down here, and they're rocking away in a very quiet room, trying to stay warm. And they've got at least one child and they're on the way. And their enslaver, John Emerson. John Emerson died. John Emerson died. We belong to Irene now. What if Irene doesn't want both of us? What if Irene doesn't want our kids? What are we going to do? Because Irene's going to be here in a week. So that's the kind of thing as a parent that grips you, that says, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to fight the only way we know how to fight. We're going to file a freedom suit in Missouri. Now, these state suits in Missouri had some success. Over 300 people had been freed because of these state suits in Missouri. Once you're in a free territory, always free. That had been the rule. So this was an epic case because all sorts of things happen. There's a cholera epidemic. The courthouse burns down. Lawyers die. In the meantime, for 7 years, they're in jail every day because they're property. They're in escrow. It's like a real estate deal. The sheriff lets them out every day. They go to work. They bring their wages back. Whoever wins the trial, the sheriff gives them those wages. They're in hiding. The kids are in hiding. So it goes through all of this. 7 years at trial. Finally, the trial court follows precedent. You are free. Doctrine of once in a free state, always in a free state. Irene appeals. Missouri Supreme Court, lo and behold, the Supreme Court not following precedent. Imagine that. The Missouri Supreme Court says, we're not going to follow that precedent. You can feel the pressures of what's going to cause a civil war coming together. And they said, we're tired of people telling us what we can do with our property. So no, they're not free. We're not going to recognize that precedent. And you think that it's over. The wheel of history is run. But then, irony of ironies, Irene transfers ownership of Dred and Harriet to her brother John Sanford, who lives in Massachusetts. This is a little trick of the law in that once you get into two people from different states, now you have diversity of citizenship. Now you can sue in federal court. And this is like going viral, right, in the 1850s, because slave people don't get into federal court. So 3 more years, they're in the jail, the kids are in hiding, and it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court justice who writes the decision, Roger B. Taney, writes what is recognized as the worst Supreme Court decision ever. Here's a picture of Roger. So if you've ever seen a guy who looks like someone who's pissed in his Cheerios, it's probably Roger. Now, I used to hack on Roger a little more, but I found out a few things about him. Despite the fact that he was a slaveholder and he made this horrible decision, I found out he's one of the few people who freed his slaves, which is no mean feat when you consider that an enslaved person at this time is worth like a used BMW. So if you're freeing 10, 20 of these people, that's a fortune. So it is this odd contradiction that this man who wrote this horrible case is very representative of the thinking that somehow he can justify slavery on the one hand as an economic necessity, and on the other hand say they aren't people worth respecting, their rights are not worth respecting. And there's an article about Justice Antonin Scalia saying he's seen a portrait of Roger based on this picture. This is a picture of Roger when he's a little bit younger. He doesn't look nearly so forlorn. Mm-hmm. But the picture in the article, Scalia says he's haunted by the picture because he knows that he believes what he sees in this man's face is the understanding that while he was a giant of the judiciary, he realizes his legacy and the only thing he's going to be remembered for is the worst case ever decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. And 3 years, well, before that, Abraham Lincoln is going to take this case and he's going to deconstruct it in the Cooper Union speech, a house divided against itself cannot stand. He's going to say, no, they were wrong. Actually, the federal government can control these things, and my interpretation is correct. And he's going to bootstrap himself into the presidency. So this case and these people who aren't people, you think it's generals, prime ministers, queens who are running, move the wheel of history, it's these people who aren't people, and they're doing it to save their children.
Wow.
That makes sense to me. The chronology is good, the case was good, but parents doing this for their kids, that makes sense. That's when this started to come to life for me. Now, they lost, and you see the wheel of history is over again, but the original family who owned Dred Scott, the Blow family, it was like 1858 crowdfunding. They raised enough money to free the entire family. Again, history is full of ups and downs, so they were free, so he knew his daughters were free, but he dies a year later of tuberculosis. Harriet lives another 15 years or so. The youngest daughter, Lizzie, lives until, I believe, 1942, which is the year Joe Biden was born. My father is 14 years old in 1942. And you think about the wheel of history, and yes, it seems long, but it's very malleable. It's like an accordion, because you think about these cases and how can they cause such rancor and passion and be a spark for the Civil War. And you think about Roe versus Wade, was decided when I was 10. I am now 60, and the Dobbs decision was just decided, and the wheel keeps going. So when these young kids come in here and say, when this wheel comes around again, I'm not going to be here. Somebody else will be interpreting this history, because history doesn't stop. But the stories are important. The legal theories are important. The chronology is important. But what was important to me, and what made it real, is the fact that it's really about parents trying to free their children. So I hope that comes out well on the film. I find it interesting, I find it gripping, and I think it's a great story, so I hope it meant something to you guys too. Any questions?
I really appreciate coming in and hearing this.
Oh, I'm glad, yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate your angle.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's important to tell these stories and to tell them on a human level that really makes sense to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you came, and I like doing this. So.
I will stay longer, but my family is
Yeah,
texting me.
I did. Yeah, thank you.
I didn't expect to learn about the Dred Scott case when I came here to Fort Snelling, much less from such a human point of view. But it's a topic that very much still applies today. There are so many people, not just Americans, but people across the globe who are fighting every day just to be seen as humans, that deserve to be treated as humans, with basic human rights. The struggle is real, but it isn't new. And people have been fighting ever since to be treated as human. Don't give up. Well, I hope you enjoyed this look at Fort Snelling. I've been past this place several times on my trips up here to the cities, and finally had a chance to make a stop and do a video to share with you guys at home. So hope you enjoyed it. Check out some of these other videos. It'll pop up at the end here, and I will see you next time here on Sights for Sore Eyes.